Hi. Can participation and critique coexist?
How do we make space to hear each other?
My name's Eric Gottesman.
My name is Hank Willis Thomas.
And we are For Freedoms, the first artist-run super PAC.
James Baldwin said that the artist's struggle for their integrity must be considered as a metaphor for the struggle that's universal and daily for all human beings to get to become human beings. Eric and I were both initially trained as photographers and have always been involved in discussions around the problematics of representation and the need for people who don't see themselves as artists to consciously engage in creative processes. As a result, we've continuously found ways to collaborate with other artists and the public in our work. We believe that all art is political and politics needs art.
We got to know each other 17 years ago when we were both living in San Francisco, and I started a salon in my living room, and we would meet as a small group of artists, and we'd eat food that I made and share our artwork with each other. It was really formative, I think, for both of us and everybody else involved in that group. But we weren't just talking about art. This was right after 9/11. And we were talking also about the wars that followed 9/11. We were afraid not only of talking about what happened then, but what was going to happen. And so we were out protesting on the streets as well as talking about art. It was an amazing time. Fast forward 16 years later, our friendship continued, but we met up again for a few days in Italy, in Florence, Italy, at the Black Portraitures Conference organized by Deborah Willis.
My mom.
His mom. And we started talking again about the 2016 campaign was just heating up, and we started talking about doing something. And one of the things that came to mind was a quote actually by an artist, Laurie Jo Reynolds, at one of these Creative Time Summits. She said, and I'm paraphrasing her, but she said, artists are supposed to get involved in politics all the way up to the steps of the State House, but they're never supposed to go inside and make the laws. And so we discussed doing something that put our own skin in the game. We'd been talking for a while about doing something about art and politics, and we wanted to put ourselves at risk.
Should we make a campaign?
Yeah, could it be a 501c4? Should it be a PAC, a super
501c3, 527?
Yeah. A lot of legal research went into the formation of this project. And we wanted something that would cause us to participate, but from a critical stance. So after a lot of conversations with lawyers and with each other, we decided to start a super PAC, and we said, let's do it.
And so the question for us is, what happens when politics becomes art? And the last several months has been an experiment for us. For Freedoms got its inspiration from Franklin Delano Roosevelt's 1941 State of the Union address, where he laid out an argument for human rights. He said everyone is entitled to 4 basic freedoms.
Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear.
The question for us was, what do those freedoms look like in the 21st century? We decided that rather than being FOUR freedoms, that maybe it's better to be FOR freedoms, because we wanted to make space for freedoms that we don't necessarily agree with or advocate for. And you can say that at its core, For Freedoms is a question. It's a platform for engagement and expression, and we're not necessarily artists, activists, politicians, but we're instead like an avenue. We're in a space where intersectional engagement can exist.
And ultimately, our mission is to claim these current structures that exist within our democracy, and also to imagine better ones. We've been saying that the medium for our project is American democracy. And we have a lot of different materials. We're using the media, press, we're using nationalistic language and symbolism of political campaigns. And we're using the super PAC itself. I mean, we registered as a real super PAC with the FEC and the IRS, but we're also artists masquerading as political operatives.
Speak for yourself.
Well, I am wearing a suit. I mean, we want to disguise ourselves as part of the system and hide in plain sight. But we also want to, as artists, we also want to twist these structures and bend them to our own agenda, whatever that is, and it's constantly evolving. So we kind of created this project without really knowing what it was. And at the beginning, the New York Times did a story on us asking, kind of what were we doing, and we
Hadn't done anything yet.
We hadn't done anything yet, and so we were trying to figure it out as we went along. But it's been amazing how much support and interest has been generated by this idea, and we keep getting flooded with all these ways in which it can play out. And so, what have we been doing, Hank?
That's a good question, Eric. Literally every day we wake up not knowing what we're doing because our team has grown to 10 people in several different places all over the country. And in the past 7 months, we've collaborated with over 35 companies, organizations, institutions, and about 70 different artists and hundreds of members of the public. And as you can see behind us, we've done several community engagement events, we've done exhibitions, pop-up installations, performances, created advertisements.
Voter registration.
Done voter registration. And ultimately, we are really trying to find so many different ways through so many different voices to speak to the issues that have been evoked in our election season.
So what questions this raises for us are several, and it causes us to constantly readjust. The reaction to what we're doing and talking and collaborating causes us to readjust our mission as we go along. The best we could describe it is that our mission is to use the Super PAC to bring art discourse into politics and political discourse into art. Now, how can we do that? And what does art have to contribute to political discourse? Curiosity, ambiguity, the sense that art can never really be wrong, critical thinking, the idea that when we make as artists, we're looking at what we make and shifting and constantly rethinking it. And conversely, how can politics infect spaces of art? I mean, what we learned from studying Duchamp is that calling something art makes it art, and similarly, calling something politics makes it political. And in that sense, the Super PAC is already made. So I guess another question is, are we for real? Or is this just a parody? Can art do more than just parody politics?
That's the question that we face because I think Eric and I find ourselves as being painfully earnest. And the question in contemporary art is, can earnestness and skepticism actually coexist? What does it look like in that happens? And what is that action? What does it mean to be an American in the 21st century? And how do we define ourselves through the lens of 50 years from now? How will future generations look at us? Because the road to progress is always under construction, and each mile mark causes new challenges, brings about new questions. And all of us are going forward. None of us are going backwards. So we actually all have more things in common than we have that separates us. And so we think that they are us and us is them. And the need to constantly be aware of this is something that we're constantly trying to focus on.
So after the last 7 months of being these sort of pseudo-political operatives, we've found that there's a real need for other avenues of using art to talk about these important issues. One of the things we've come across is that institutions have limitations. Artists are supposed to be unbridled and to express themselves without reservation. But where do unbridled artists show work that puts institutions at moral or even legal risk? We've run into several situations where the messages that we want to put out that are advocated by these artists are too strong, too political, too risky for nonprofits and for governmental organizations, which are supposed to be non-political. But what is that about? Are art spaces, or any public space really, devoid of politics?
We want to galvanize creative communities to use our voices not in unison, but actually to complicate and challenge easy answers to very difficult questions. And our political system is in dire need of creative solutions to the problems our society is facing. I think about an artist, Nicholas Lobo from South Africa, who said, we need to live in tomorrow because that way we won't be surprised when we get there. He said the problem with with South Africa post-apartheid is that they weren't living in the freedom they were fighting for. So when it arrived, they didn't know what to do with it.
So this project is not just about us or our team, it's about all of us. And it's important for us to lift our voices together and everybody else's voices. One of the exciting things for both of us is in our collaborations with artists are the possibilities that we couldn't have foreseen. Many of the works in our exhibition address these issues in ways that we didn't expect. And even outside, you can see there's some university students from Vassar College and Bowdoin College that have gotten in touch with us, and they've set up student chapters. So we're building our network in all these different ways. So in the next 25 days, and long after that, ours is not a specific call to action, but it's an invitation to collaborate with us.
Help us.
Help us. We would love to meet you, listen, and dream together ways to use this vehicle that we've started creating to basically do weird things.
Which is what change is about. Thank you all.
Thank you. Oh, wait. Oh,
Cross-examination. So I'm really intrigued by your project.
Me too.
Okay, which one of you said was talking about the earnestness? The earnestness. Was that you?
That was him.
So,
I think you're
look,
hiding.
so there was a period in American life when art was really, really, really politicized in the 30s. You know, you showed some of the Norman Rockwell, you know, the sort of classics from that era. But people really turned against that style, you know, that sort of the proletarian, the social realist stuff. It was so earnest, so heavy-handed. I mean, it was propaganda. Are we heading back? And then I have another question that's the flip side of that. But I mean, I'm curious what you think about this. This is a burning issue that's been burning for centuries.
Well, in the sense that all art is political, all art is propaganda, because value systems are based off of what we think is important. And by calling something art, it allows people to see things differently, which again elevates its value. And so I think rather than going backwards, I think we're just reshifting the lens so that we can look at the same things that we've been trying to say in a way that allows people to think critically about them. It's
also interesting to think about that time in Rockwell. His posters were actually used then by the Office of War Information to raise money for the government effort.
Which was openly propaganda.
Openly propaganda, and in reaction, you know, that work was described as kitsch and kind of by proponents of abstraction was sort of denounced. But then that abstraction was also instrumentalized in other ways by the CIA.
That's right. Now the CIA, there was a famous where didn't they embrace Jackson Pollock to some degree? I mean, it was all secretive, right? But the abstract expressionism was this big U.S. export. We were very proud of it, and the government that was used as propaganda.
So it's interesting to think about the trajectory of how art does get co-opted or can be subversive.
Okay, flip side. There is a way in which art is used politically these days. You know this. Richard Florida, the creative class, gentrification. And what do you guys think of that? I mean, where we are all these sort of, I've written about this at great length, you know, this is like we're all these kind of pets. And we're mascots, and we move into a city, and we do colorful things, and everybody wants to come and live, you know, and artists are basically a gentrification shock force, right? And that's the other sort of political use of art. What do you guys think of that?
We're trying to gentrify the political landscape. Literally, I think that's what's necessary. I think the reality is that critique, discourse, and evolution are actually things that our political system is against. And so what we're trying to do is actually move on in, and not because we know the answers, but because we have the questions.
Nice.